Go.
Hi-ho! And welcome to the Camelot Unchained pre-winter holiday special.
These get better every time.
Okay then.
Now, Ben, have you been a good boy this year?
Well, we did get to beta, so I guess we did okay.
So how are we doing since then?
Since then, I guess we've had a lot of tech debt.
A lot of infrastructural work, and we are getting back into the point of building new gameplay features, which is super happy for me. I like big rocks, and I don't know why. I like when they fall from the sky. When a stone drops in and crushes your grin. So yes, lots of work internally around sieges and the tech to support sieges internally. What's your favorite thing that you worked on personally this week, even if it's not a top 10 point?
This week has been a lot of testing and just going over scope for things. So we're trying to sort of map out what all of the tasking is around doing siege engines and like how the different interface pieces are going to come together, what we need to do on the animation side of things, and so coordinating all of that so that we'll have a good siege engine experience in the game here, hopefully pretty soon.
Yeah. I did stuff with prime numbers to shatter buildings. That'll be to shatter chunks of buildings when they come apart. So I got to have all my heart together.
Fun with math.
Yes. I'll be getting right back on over to that immediately after this.
Okay.
Also, tonight is the East Coast Winter CSE holiday party. There was this Christmas party we had long ago that there was no. It was when we first moved into this office, and there wasn't really any furniture, and we had it here in the office. And the first half of and we live streamed it. And the first half of the Christmas party stream was just like us putting together tables and couches so that we could have a place to sit during our Christmas party. Which led to a lot of CSC _ butt crack, because people were bent over a lot, crawling around with some IKEA hex wrenches.
That's what our entire office is made of.
I do not promise that we will repeat that mistake. We probably will not live stream it. We're bringing a bunch of people over to my house and just gonna have a little bit of Overcooked, a little bit of Smash Brothers, bunch of couch co-op kind of thing, low key, video game and chill.
At least it will be better than the last year's Christmas party.
Oh. Yeah, you always got to go negative. Let us never speak of last year's Christmas party again. Yes, we do only the best and finest in terms of employee comfort and yeah.
People are enjoying your hat and sweater, and we're scared of your voice at the start.
I'm gonna make a new avatar of the game. It's just gonna be CSC Mr. Hanky.
They recognized it.
There's no one else in this world who says Heidi Ho quite like that, is there? Is there, Max?
Not that I know of.
All right, so let's dive into the top 10 stuff that's landed. This is mostly boring to me because I've been in the trenches on a lot of this, of helping other people get their code in instead of writing my own, like you get to do when you're the lead. But that's anyway. So number one. The standalone building server. So we last week we had all the building stuff, all the code about there's two aspects to building physics. There's the stuff that's just like directly in the game loop about this hit this thing at this instant and bounced off, and that's all got to be like super low latency. And then there's this other category of stuff about, is this building still holding together? Is it structurally sound? And that's the stuff that takes longer to compute. Like, we can't necessarily give those answers, spit them out, 30, 60 times a second, whatever. And so we, have and we don't want those kinds of heavy calculations to slow down the, tight reactive physics. And so we moved those calculations over to a separate server, and it's sort of increasingly moving apart from, the other stuff. Like, at first it was sort of like a separate thread running on the same box and same process, and now it's a completely standalone thing that can run on a entirely separate box, just talking to each other over a pipe in the server rack. Just gotta stream back and forth between them. TCP for life. That's so that's the progress on that. There's one more, and that's testing running right now on Hatchery, and once that, and we can, assuming we don't spot anything, with that'll be done. It's kind of the next round ongoing is, saying, okay, now that this runs on its own box, separate from everything, how do we do concurrency in parallel to, not having to work around the physics and all, just being able to run that box flat out and tuning for some of that stuff. So a little more work there, and, a little bit of back and forth between me and Colin on, exactly how, like, the physics stuff that I'm doing intersects with that, and which things need to move to where on that. But coming along.
It's complicated, huh?
I think we'll have some form of the threading and concurrency, and fairly soon, though. Hopefully next week we'll just be like done.
Does that have any performance implications, or is it just all back end?
So, all of this, if you've been playing in some of the playtests where we have, like, go knock over a whole bunch of buildings, and, a whole bunch of players knocking over a whole bunch of buildings all at once, and we run these playtests, you'll see that, like, when a whole lot of that starts happening, the time lag starts going up. Like, the time between when you fire off a skill, and when you see the results starts going up. That just, you can see it in your network window as time delay, if you pop up that HUD, and this is all targeted around reducing that, making sure those kinds of things do not disrupt things. So in an ideal world, this will just be perfect. When this is working perfectly, you won't notice it.
Yes.
So getting rid of bottlenecks that you can notice.
Cool.
And that's that's just moving along nicely. Number two. Over to Ben.
Okay. Number 2 is a work in progress on the new crafting UI. AJ has been chugging along, it says here, putting the new crafting UI together. We put together a new iteration, and now are addressing feedback, which is basically just the new crafting UI is more or less complete. It's just going through review and getting some bug fixes and some feature additions and tuning. So once that's done, we'll have a new crafting UI to show off, which would be nice, because that's a big improvement over the UI that we had previously, which was very developer focused and just focused on getting the raw functionality. This is an actual, like, user experience pass and has some art to it, so it'll be a big improvement.
we have this thing called a dev UI, where just, like, someone who's not a UI developer in the course of working on a feature can just, spit out a bunch of HTML that's, like, the ugliest possible HTML, and it's on purpose that, like, there's no styling or features to make sure that, you don't build those things into your placeholder, and getting that, and then, keep that good division of, like, don't try and polish the turd, just get someone else to, get the actual UI team to do their part, and there's sort of a glue interface where, like, where we can separate the data and the presentation and then swap in a new presentation. So it's a pretty good system, I think.
Yeah.
the way it works. So I've been looking at screenshots of that, and yeah, it's sexy. It's sexy. So number three is back to you two,
Okay.
because you've been. I'm sorry, I did not read the very latest rev of the document, the version 0.5 that MJ sent out yesterday, because I needed to break some rocks.
Right.
I had to spend some time breaking my rocks.
Yeah. Well, this is a little bit further down the road anyway. We do need the initial version of that going just to test building destruction before we get into the details of Siege. But number 3 is Siege design. And I've been working with Mark. As Andrew said, we've gone through like 5 revisions on that document already. Putting together sort of the future plan for how Siege engines are eventually going to work, which is going to require considerably more work than the Siege engines you see in the game right now, which are just the Scorpions that are basically using the archery system to do their manual aiming. Eventually we'll have far more advanced Siege engines that do some interesting things, which we don't want to really get into yet as we get into prototyping and figure out exactly how they're going to work. But there's considerable amount of time and design effort and some prototyping going into some of those things. So
Can I still throw Max at people?
can you throw what?
Max. Can I still throw Max at people?
I think so.
That's
Try.
the latest rev of the doc has not cut out the ability to throw Max, right?
No.
Okay.
There's still some stuff in there that is just raw physics of physical moving parts causing whatever physics effects they have in the game.
Nobody tosses a dwarf.
Yes. Yes, they do. So, I'll take number 4. This week, Wiley just did some work on, it's the little things about taking the effects on weapons and stuff and making them dynamically adapt to exactly what weapon you are holding and how that moves, and so that we don't have to like author separate effects for long swords versus daggers, and just one effect, and it just works for no matter what you're doing.
That's cool.
And that is a big improvement. A small but subtle thing, so with some cool math in it. Also, I'll take number 5.
I hope so.
Yeah, mesh simplification. So this is work that was mostly wrapped up last week, but then it turned out we looked at it and said, there's a little more iteration on this, which is, you get these giant complicated triangle meshes, and then we need that we procedurally generate, or players build with the buildings, or things that happen with character meshes, and we need to adapt those and cut them down to smaller sizes. And a lot of people do this. A lot of games that have much more like predefined, scripted, non-sandboxy, non-player driven types of assets do this as part of their build pipeline, and they can spend a fair amount of time on it, and we have to do it super fast at runtime because everything is so dynamic. And just further improvements happened in that. In some cases it's even half as small as it was before, and runs faster, and makes things look better, cheaper. The main motivation behind that was connected into better physics colliders for stuff in the terrain, and then taking those and using them to drive nav meshes for NPCs. So now that we've put mesh simplification to bed, we're gonna switch back to the thing that motivated that, and just have the stuff that we depended on and worked on.
Cool.
That's coming right along.
So that means smarter NPCs for the game that won't get stuck on things and lost like they currently do.
Yes, that is exactly what the point is.
Right. And so I think that's super exciting.
Yeah. And it's the challenges of pathfinding in a huge dynamic world, huge world and a dynamic world.
Yes.
Always exciting. Number 6, scenario improvements. So we're working towards, as part of like all the stuff about dropping rocks and smashing walls and building siege engines. This is coming back to a big push on siege scenarios, and we've also started doing work on things to make just scenarios work better. And that's with a lot of the tech debt that we've paid down. We're able to iterate on that a lot more quickly, script the scenarios instead of like doing a bunch of hard-coded stuff. And so we new scriptability for scenario victory requirements with things like how many walls did you knock down, scriptability for spawn points, and that's going to continue, and also just flow into castle siege scenarios.
Right, because we're trying to put together a good test case for sieges so that we can get some siege testing done. And the best way to do that is to just make a scenario around it so that we can get a bunch of players in, build a castle real quick, have them just give a bunch of siege engines and just knock it down.
Yeah, so that's coming real soon now.
Yep, hopefully.
No particular timeline, but as always, just keep an eye on your email for testing opportunities. So number 7. Actually, this is the part where we said we were going to drag Tyler into this, isn't it?
We did say that because it's a bunch of art.
Yo, Tyler! Come here!
Now, Mr. Tyler!
John and I are talking about feathers and scapulas.
Number 7.
What?
Yeah,
Scaphism?
Scapulas.
Scaphism.
Scapulas.
Also known as the boats.
What? I don't know what we're
The
talking
boats. The boats is my absolute favorite, horrifying, prehistoric method of torture and execution.
What was it? The boats?
The boats.
What?
Scaphism.
I'm not gonna ask because it's just gonna get worse.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's like
Number
it's
7.
like so horrible you wouldn't even have to do it in Game of Thrones.
Exactly. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff right now that we have for Art Animation 2.0 and Art Characters 2.0. The art specifically, just because we're kind of rounding the bend on getting all the assets done.
Just the bin?
The rounding the bend. We're running around Ben to get all the assets done. Basically, at this point, we've got most of the asset work done with the idea that over the next week, we'll just start working on a local build on my machine and just setting everything up, looking for bugs, and at some point, just pull the trigger and everything will show up in game. Why are you smiling?
I'm smiling
Just
because
because you
I
got
love you.
shiny glasses.
You make my hat stand up, Tyler.
So this week there was a lot of stuff done. So what I wrote for Art Animation 2.0, updated styling and timing support, first pass complete. I've got 2 completes in there, and ready to begin testing. So animation retargeting. I don't know if you're going to say something.
No.
Sandra worked. He looked at me and kind of did this inhale like he was going to say something. Sandra worked ahead.
I'm just breathing in the aroma of Tyler.
It's, I think, sandalwood. Sandra worked ahead of
It
our current
smells like
goals
the
by
art pit.
retargeting some of the lower priority animations, such as the fidgets for a couple of our classes. Scott imported all of our previously retargeted animations into the editor, meaning we're ready to start putting all the pieces together. There's still going to be more animations that we're going to do, but this kind of supports what we primarily needed for the first pass. Work in progress, weighting the human females. Joe is currently doing rough weighting on all our female armors. These should be completed early next week. For Art Character 2.0, better looking and more performant characters. So this is the one that a lot of stuff happened, including some of the supporting tech. Work in progress, updated model LODs. So Dion completed all the LOD work for the updated new Lucrepan meshes. We've completed most of the first pass of the LOD work, meaning that once we address this will be after we get like just the LOD zeros of the characters in, then we'll go in, we'll fix bugs, we'll make everything work, and then we'll match all the existing rough LOD work, match all the LOD zero work, meaning that it's kind of silly for us to do kind of complete all LODs if we have to change something with the base mesh. And just to be clear, LODs is level of detail. As your guy runs farther off in the distance, we draw less polys, we draw less, our textures get smaller. And in this case, the art created LODs, also, I don't think I've told you this, we basically, based on the percentages that we reduce the characters, in some cases our characters are like a third the cost of what they are now. For some of those LODs, and they obviously just look better because the human eye does a good job. So the goal here is that moving forward, after all these guys get in, we'll have a nice clean slate of how to do everything. It'll all be written up, And moving forward, the goal is to have higher poly characters than we do now up close, and then far more performant characters at distance. So continuing on, armor fitting, Dion completed all the human-female armor fittings, as well as 2 of the 3 TDD armors to the Lucrepan male model. She'll then move on to the females. Work in progress, importing and setup. So Scott and Sandra basically just had an importing party, walked me through the process as well, because it was something I'd never done. So this week, all the nude base meshes were imported, as well as the rest of the human male armors. Currently in progress are all the female armor imports, and then we'll do the Lucrepan nudes and armors. Work in progress, updated nude materials. So John completed a first pass of the Valks, and then he'll next move on to the base undergarment shirt and pants for each realm, which is that undergarment layer that your characters wear. After that, updated textures and UVs. Dave completed the code support for this, so that we, when we make the switch, basically all the characters using the old assets will all become invisible. So for a short period, we'll see some swords running around by themselves. And then as we update everything, hopefully it all works, and you see our new characters. Also, he completed, faster than we all expected, the LOD support work. Like I said, we won't be doing the artist-made LODs first. We'll keep with our procedural system, but Dave's already completed the tech for that. So sometime in the middle of next year, we'll probably be doing the LOD work. And that's the character art stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye, Tyler.
Bye.
Sure. Let's see.
Although,
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Trebuchet animations. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
are you gonna kill it?
Uh-oh. No, I
The printed out mistletoe.
It's mistletoe. Come on.
no,
Y'all know what
No
that
pressure.
it's been a cat.
Yeah.
I was not under that. I was never under that mistletoe. There was no mistletoe collusion.
Let's not get into that this week.
Anyway, trebuchet animations. John, in addition to waving mistletoe at me, John did waiting an animation pass on our...
Joe did.
Joe. Yes, that makes much more sense.
Yes, because if John was making animations, we would be in an interesting situation.
I'm going to paint some textures next.
Maybe he would like to. I don't know.
All right, so Joe did a quick waiting and animation pass on our generic trebuchet model for testing, and we're gonna be putting that in our test build soon. You won't see it yet, but we will enjoy seeing it work.
Yep, I've heard that is the thing.
All right, so I'm gonna skip number 10 until I can check something on that.
Oh.
And just hand you number 11.
Okay. 11 is work in progress mage specific gear. So Michelle is continuing to work through scepters and has begun creating gauntlets. Scepters are for the druid and gauntlets are for the wave weaver, I believe. These items will greater differentiate our mage classes from one another and also give us more item customization. So this is basically because each caster has a sort of focus item in place of a weapon, because we need them to have itemization dependencies in the same way that fighters have item dependencies, so that upgrading your item can give you more effectiveness or different customization to the things your character can do. So mages just sort of have these focus items that give them different stats and capabilities in the same way that fighters use swords and shields and things.
All right. So that is our top 10, which is exactly 10.
That is exactly 10.
It may be 11 after I check a detail on that.
I see.
So you guys have seen me talk to Tyler. You've seen me talk to Ben. Which hat do you prefer? We're going to rotate this. Put it to the backers. Let me know what they think.
They are thinking about what would have happened if you guys had kissed.
I would imagine the beards would probably just get tangled.
That's
And then,
exactly what they're saying.
That's the-
do you guys know what a king rat
Let's
is?
see. The vote is for green.
The vote is for green.
Some votes for red, but mostly green.
Which is green?
Green is the left.
No, the other side.
This is the green?
Yes.
That's the green side.
All right, we'll watch this.
surprised that in the land of
Ooh.
Oh,
we
yeah.
didn't get more votes for a red hat.
Pretty.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh. All right.
I
Got
buy
red
the-
patch right at the front now. There you go.
I buy the best things from the Target women's section.
All right.
And before we open up the questions, I always have to ask Ben, medal of the week,
This week is Sabaton.
Sabaton. Good choice. It's definitely some Arthurian metal.
Yes.
Do you you got any other picks for the other realms?
For the other realms,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like Sabaton does like Swedish pagans, right? So that's a little bit Vikings as well. I don't know what TDD metal would be. It's probably something very like Rhapsody of Fire or something.
I go for more like the folky stuff.
You think
like,
so?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's winter, it's gray, it's cloudy. So I've been listening to a lot of Agalok. There's this one tiny indie band I'm gonna plug called Harrow. Go on Bandcamp. Their little EP, "A Fire on the Mountain," is just. It is it is Tuatha in winter for me.
Okay.
And yeah. Back to my old Enslaved prog metal for the Vikings. Enslaved is just one of those bands that like I always come back to for like 20 years running.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
It's like a band that like I've grown up with them. Like when I was 19, they were putting out Frost and just like this totally raw, just in your face black metal, and then like
And their style has like completely changed.
yeah,
right?
and they've more like they have over the years like matured and morphed into just this like avant-garde prog. I'm not even sure if I would call them metal or what, but they're just progressive. And as I've kind of like gotten out of just like angry, put on the boots and stomp things in the pit, and more cerebral, yeah. So I always love my Enslaved. So, what do you got for us, Max?
We're opening it up to questions. This is the Q&A portion of the Friday afternoon stream we do every week.
And I'm gonna make this a fairly short one because I really, really want to shatter some rubble before I go.
All right. Well, let me know when it's the 5-minute warning.
Okay.
Okay. Lotoween asks, will there be a weekend test?
I am not actually sure. I will check with let's send a runner to ask Ash and Brian and Tim on the state of weekend testing. Yeah. Runner is dispatched.
Okay. Let's see. Yomi asks, there was some discussion today during the Morning with Max stream about the types of crowd control that will exist in CU, and we were diverted to Ben to ask about this.
Okay.
Rumor has it that hard CC, stuns, knockbacks, loss of control, etc., will not be in the game, but soft CC, slows, snares, etc., will. Can you confirm or deny and elaborate on the CC you have in mind for CU?
So we haven't said that anything hard CC will not be in the game at all. What we have said is that we're trying to limit it as much as we reasonably can. We don't want to put any more CC in the game than we absolutely have to, because having control taken away from your character is something that is generally not a positive experience.
Although, the nature of physics means that absolutely no knockback is, that puts a hard limit on some of the physics things that we want to do, though.
Yeah, I was going to say knockback is one of the things I wouldn't necessarily put on that list, because just relocating your character doesn't necessarily prohibit you from using abilities or interrupting that in some way and taking counter actions. Hard CC would be something like stun, where you lose absolute control of your character. You can't move, you can't use abilities, you can't do anything until the effect wears off.
Yeah, the thing that annoys me the most about CC personally is and I am stuck here waiting.
Yeah.
And I cannot do crap. And, if the knockback is brief enough, like, okay, now I'm over there, but I can do something. I can continue to act. That to me is, I'm still in the game. I'm still having fun. So exactly, where we're going to end up finding that balance on physics knockbacks versus just, that hit you and that hit you so hard that your corpse is getting knocked back is, that's another question.
Yeah. And so knockback I wouldn't necessarily put into that category, but I will say that things like stun, right? Taking and breaking that down into separate categories and saying, you can't use abilities, or you can't use some subsection of your abilities, or you can't move. Separately aren't as bad, but put all together is really kind of sort of negative. So I would try to break
Right.
that up more and to say that, like,
when there's 8 different people and they each do one of those things to me, I'm going
Right.
to end up in that sad place.
well, hopefully we can limit that to some extent as well by placing immunities and contingencies on those to say that, like, if you are immobilized, you also can't lose your ability to use skills, or if you are silenced and you can't cast spells or whatever, movement impairing effects are either completely ineffective or somewhat ineffective or something, just to limit the amount of crowd control that can be applied to a character at a given time, or at least for a given duration, so that the more of these things that get affected to your character, the less amount of time they affect you.
Can I punch someone so hard they go into the veil?
I
I know the answer is no.
I
know
don't think
the answer is
we really wanted to do that
That's
necessarily. Like, there's kind of a way in which that happens, but it's not something I really. It would take a lot of elaboration to be able to explain that. So not in any normal terms.
Okay. that was not a serious question. That was a
I'ma punch you so hard you don't land until the next Veilstorm.
Okay. Bearbow asks, where is standalone cube in the queue of work?
it is a lower priority than siege weapons right now. But it is a thing that I think you can expect early next year. After we're going to come back to that after we've nailed down siege gameplay, and also the ability system.
Yes,
ability
definitely the
system
ability
scripting.
system.
So those two things are kind of blocking. More. Yeah, the ability system is just like so many things depend on getting Ben the tools he needs for the final scriptability of runes and things, and then so that's got to be highest priority, and siege is the next phase of actual gameplay. So those two things together are just they dominate everything, So, but early next year, springish, late winter, early spring is when I see time coming into the schedule for that.
Okay.
And of course, you can just run the game with cube equals 1 right now.
Yeah, you can still do offline building if you want to.
The biggest thing is just getting process and QA into place to make sure that we don't break standalone cube when we put out a new build of the main game. And vice versa. So in the ideal world, we just get to a point where, every time we put out a new build of the main game, it goes through a QA gate, and when that passes, that, just is that build with cube equals 1 turned on. Which is, what it is.
Okay.
Odelvik asks, will it be possible to create non-anchored cube objects so we can topple domino cubes for fun and giggles, as well as sliding cube slabs sandwiched between inner and outer walls for self-repairing wall?
Well, that's clever.
That is clever. And the fact is, someone's going to come up with a way to do that. Like, to just, build the wall and then carve it out and let it fall into place.
Yeah, like,
so,
you can figure that out.
It becomes rubble. Will we intentionally support it? And this is the kind of thing where, like, there's so much potential for horrible things in another game where, we bring in a full, we just open up a full spectrum of engineering and physics tools and toys, and let people build things. And like if you've seen the game Besieged,
Right.
that's a super fun little build your own siege weapon kind of thing type of game. It's little thing. It's like less than $10 on Steam, or Epic. Maybe it's on the Epic Game Store. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, I'm not
That's
sure either.
exciting times in game stores.
Yep.
But that's the kind of thing where I fear opening up, like, if you as a 2018 person with a degree in mechanical engineering are able to bring that into the game with a full toolkit of stuff, then ultimately it just becomes an arms race of Newtonian mechanics that could potentially just make all other skills and effort obsolete. And so we want to limit the ability of that just to have a certain game, but there's potential to make that other game someday.
Yeah, Physics Gone Wild can certainly be a game.
Yeah, Physics Gone Wild in space.
Tons of
That's
Tonti.
not an announcement. That's
Okay.
not a product announcement in any way. Go ahead.
Tons of Tanta asks for Andrew. Ever heard of Cult of Fire? If not, check them out.
I should. I'm a big fan of Cult of Luna, yeah, which is really fun because Cult of Luna did this latest album with a singer named Julie Christmas, and so now here it is, like December 14th. I'm like, hey Google, play Christmas music, and I get
Not what you expected.
yeah, The Wreck of the SS Needle and other horrible songs. But Cult of Fire, yes, let's do it.
Hamblepants wants to know, did Andrew show up in the parking lot like that, or change once he was in the office?
I showed up in the parking lot like this. This is my outfit for the CSE winter holiday party. So I woke up this way. No filter. Hashtag no filter. Hashtag woke up like this. Hashtag you sure got a pretty beard. I can draw things on the hat too.
Drooged asks, can you talk generally about how you plan to balance realms with all the non-mirrored classes?
Well, that's quite a topic. Let's see. Briefly, the concept of balance is sort of something to look at from a high level. The important part is that everybody is having fun in the game, and that one of the ways to make that happen is to ensure that when the different realms fight each other, those engagements are relatively well balanced around players at matching skill levels and matching class selections for different roles and everything. That those match up and they fight, and then the fights go the way you would expect based on the sort of outcomes that would be beneficial to having a fun game. So that means, the Arthurians don't just always beat the Vikings. It's more or less a matter of skill and execution and somewhat gear and class selection and things like that. When you get down to like individual character balance, that's when you start talking about whether classes are mirrored or not. And even games that have entirely mirrored classes still have class balance issues between classes. So you'll have a rogue versus a warrior. Like, is that balanced? Well, obviously not, because rogues and warriors are different. You'd have the same issue as you would have if you had, in our case, like a Black Knight versus a Mjolnir. Those two classes are different, so when they fight each other, there are going to be differences, and those differences are going to equate to being things that we have to balance around. We're not really trying to ensure that our game is balanced in a way that you might look at when you're looking at other games.
Like, there's definitely going to be pairings where, if you just had a completely empty field and one guy from this class and one guy from this class and they fight, it's going to be like 90% plus which one is going to win.
Right, and so
But
that's going to be the case.
How do they synergize with their realm mates?
Right, and that's going to be the case regardless of whether we had mirrored classes, right? Because you would still have the difference between a warrior and a rogue, or a mage and an archer, or whatever. those classes are still going to be different. Even if they were mirrored across all the realms, they're still going to be different. So you're still going to have these advantageous situations. So the fact that they're not mirrored isn't as big of a deal as you might think, because if we have different warriors for each realm, different fighters for each realm, those are going to be imbalanced in the same way that a fighter versus a rogue would be imbalanced. So it's not going to be perfect no matter what you do. And because we're looking at more of a high level, we're not as concerned about saying, well, it's really important that if one fighter fights another fighter, that those are complete 50-50. They can have advantages and disadvantages against each other, even within the same role or archetype. So when we look at the game from a high level, however, if everything is more or less equal in terms of realm populations and having, very dedicated groups fighting on each side, if we're seeing that, like, on all servers across all realms in the game, all the Arthurian realms are doing really well, then we have to look at balance from an overarching perspective and say, why is that? But when we look at an individual class and say, well, this specific class always beats this other specific class, those imbalances are sort of inherent to the game, because we are looking at from more of a rock, paper, scissors sort of analogy, where certain classes have advantages against certain other classes, but every class has some sort of advantage against some other class. When you start talking about classes that are meant to be offensive and deal damage, obviously when you get into healers, they're not really good at killing anybody, but they fulfill a specific role. So the idea is generally that every class is useful. If we ever get to a point where players generally feel that a class isn't really useful, and the statistics really bear that out, where even if it's being underplayed, the players that are playing that class are also not finding that class is really effective, and the statistics say that that's the case, then we'll have to start looking at some balanced things of why that is and how to improve that class and make them actually more viable in the game. But as I said, this is a really big issue when we just start talking about, like, well, what does balancing even mean? Why are we taking the path that we're taking? But I hope that that's a very brief overview of that general topic. And if you want to talk about it more, I'll see if there's some conversations I can get into maybe on the forums there. As I know this is a thing that really gets talked about quite a bit, of like, how are we balancing the game, or why aren't we mirroring things? But it's something that Dark Age of Camelot didn't do. It's something that other games have done and have still experienced balance issues. So I don't think that mirroring is really a solve-all to balance problems in games. And so I don't really consider it being as much of a problem as some people might think that it is.
Dark Society Network asks, can the two of you describe the experience of destroying buildings that you aim for? What level of detail are we talking about?
So the iconic thing that, like that one moment is, I keep coming back to it, is Helm's Deep in the Peter Jackson movie of the Two Towers. Although lately I've been, just that moment when the wall explodes. We want to have that, and that's got to be hard. It's, we are working. One of the things in our current siege design is, just carry a bomb up to the wall. But where you hopefully have not made just one tiny little drain that gives you access to everything. But more and more, going with the larger scope of a whole bunch of catapults on the field, a whole bunch of, catapults up on, weapons, scorpions, ballistas on the wall, and being able to bring a siege tower up. So, not, to use another movie example, in the movie Return of the King, there's the Battle of Pelennor Fields, which is just epic. It is just so much stuff happening all at once, and we are not, that is like definitely the Hollywood version. We're going to end up at a slower pace than that, because if you, like, it's very Hollywood. Like, if you actually destroyed chunks of building at that rate, then the entire city of Gondor would be completely obliterated in about 4 minutes. So the key thing is, there will be a decent number of siege weapons out there, and siege weapons will all involve multiple people to use and load and fire optimally. some of them may be usable by one person to just run to this station, then run to this station, but to really maximize the power of them, you need multiple people on them, which will give a lot of ability to, to stay engaged. We definitely don't want the case of, okay, one little group rolls out the catapult and they just pound the wall and everyone just sits there waiting and trying to maybe pick off some people on the wall with bows up until like we can finally get into the building. We are going to try hard to engage as many people, and we're also going to be having counter siege type weapons where you can try to take out the siege weapons. Like, so you bring out that siege tower and you load it up with people, and it moves towards the wall slowly, but it's like it's a focused fire target for everyone on the wall, and can you bring that down before it gets to the wall is that's a thing that matters. And so it's it almost becomes like risk and reward. How much are you willing to spend to produce siege weapons to destroy how much of the opponent's defenses? And you bring out it's like bringing do you bring your queen out on the chessboard early? That kind of strategy of because you get you put dozens of people on a siege tower and roll that up to the wall, and if you successfully do it, you just bypassed all of their defenses and got a bunch of rogues into the inner courtyard, and they're going to wreak havoc. But if you don't, but also that siege tower cost a fair bit to construct, and everyone knows you really don't want to let them get that up to the wall, and can you take it out? So in some sense you can talk a little bit about it as a chess match, and where also you have to spend to get what pieces and how much resources are you willing to invest, and that gets into the just larger campaign strategy of what's it worth to our realm to take this keep that controls these resources that we could harvest. But that's a much bigger picture.
As far as getting down to the smaller picture, we're at half meter resolution for our blocks,
right?
So you can get down to where you're destroying individual half-meter blocks of a castle, all the way up to taking out huge chunks of wall. But there is quite a bit to do as far as the specific timing of things like that, because we don't want sieges to be something that happens quickly, where you could just roll up to a castle and immediately knock holes in the wall and have it destroyed, because they do take a long time to build and a lot of resources to invest in. So we want sieges to be something that takes a while. But it does get fairly fine-grained when you get right down to both the construction and the destruction of buildings.
Strike wants to know, Andrew, where do you get that collection of awesome things? Wizard hats, sunglasses, sweaters, sword.
The sword, I'm going to ask Ben, because I think this is, Ben has a nice collection of stuff, and I just was like, well, Santa's holding a sword on my shirt, I should have a sword too.
So this one, I'm trying to recall where.
This is surprisingly well balanced.
It is. This is
really
a stage fighting
well-balanced.
sword, so it's blunted. It's not sharp. So the weight is a bit
Yeah,
heavier.
I checked that. I wanted to protect my bin.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I have not purchased or brought anything in for the purpose of doing these sort of demonstrations that is meant to harm people, with good reason, because that's a thing that's
I don't
likely
think that's
to
a
happen
demonstration if you actually intend to harm people.
Well, people do get harmed in demonstrations. It's not always the safest thing, because this might be getting too far into these sort of things, but there's a significant difference between fighting with stage swords and fighting with sharp swords. And even people doing demonstrations will sometimes do them with sharp weapons and have to be very careful, just because the techniques and things are so different, because the blades will bind differently and the weighting is different because you have to have blunted blades. And so it's fighting with live sharp swords is different than fighting with stage swords.
The hat, as with most of my shiny sequin stuff, was in the discount clearance bin of the women's section at Target, America's finest upscale retailer. And the shirt is something I've had for several years. There's a website called tipsyelves.com.
Wow.
Yeah. It's filled with horrible things, but this was probably the most horrible. I think they have some that actually light up, but that's like, if you want a disposable sweater, you're gonna wear it once to a Christmas party and then just burn it. But I like my horrible things to be horrible again and again.
Get some value out of
it. This is like, I keep, you think like, how often am I going to wear that? Well, I personally
Once a
keep
year?
coming up with excuses to wear this. I wore it last year. I wore it there were like 3 Christmas parties last year, and a couple Christmas streams, and
Yep, that's true. It's not even Christmas and you're already wearing it, so there you go.
yes, all hail Galactic Santa.
Christo US, I think, has a metal question. Mastodon or alien weaponry?
I'm gonna probably go with Mastodon of the two. How about you, Ben?
I would agree.
Yeah. Mastodon was like my gateway to getting my wife to like metal.
Wow. It's an interesting place to start.
Yeah. Well,
But
I mean, she's
yeah,
went grunge
Yeah,
to
yeah.
sludge, and then Mastodon and Baroness, and now she's creditable. Disagrees with me about things, which is awesome.
That's good.
Rhaegar has a question. Ben, during MJ's first Veilwalker video, he said that the biggest pain point for people getting killed by stealth was when larger numbers of stealthers kill smaller numbers. Will we make any effort to not penalize a team of stealthers taking on even or larger numbers?
Yeah, that is one of the things that we've talked about, right? Because it's not necessarily a negative experience to say that an equal group of players encounters another equal group of players, even if they have some sort of advantage like their class distribution or whatever. But when a large group of players group up and kill a smaller group of players, stealth aside, right? Even having like Zergs running around smashing on solo players or small groups, like we don't want any of those cases to be prevalent where we have large groups of players preying on small groups of players and the small groups of players just don't have any fun. So that's true in stealth, and that's true in cases that aren't to do with stealth. But anytime we have equal groups of players, like if we have a whole bunch of stealth players playing together as part of a siege or something, right? Where they all are stealthing into the Veil, running around together, and then jumping out and taking on a group of enemies all together, that sort of thing is fine. And so that's the sort of thing where we want to look at the solutions to sort of penalizing stealth in cases where it's abusive or where it's taking on small numbers of players. And by detecting how many players are around, we can sort of filter out those cases and say, look, are you engaging against only one player or only a few players, or are you in part of a larger battle, in which case this sort of engagement is actually something that we want to encourage.
Yeah. So, Max, let's wrap it up. In 5
Okay,
minutes.
one last question.
If it's a good one to end on.
It's a good one.
Uh-oh.
The man with no screen name asks, is there any aspect or feature about CU you would like to see leave a mark on games or games development, and why?
So in terms of development, there are a lot of technologies, especially about how we're managing our concurrency, that I believe that these things are, the right way, the next generation that, a lot of other game engines are, still not really catching up to. So I think, there's definitely some GDC papers to be presented on this kind of stuff. We got a ship to have the credibility on that. So that's why we really haven't talked about a lot of the under the hood stuff. In terms of gameplay, the thing that I most want to see leave a mark, is just outside of outside of specifics to medieval fantasy or things, is incorporate just incorporating more player agency into a dynamic world. to have less scripting and to have more just, things that combine together to create a story.
Yeah, on the technical side, I think we all have to say scalability, right? Because that's the main defining feature of the reason we had to build our own engine, was to basically make a game that is bigger than anything else. And if we can do that effectively, which it seems like we're on a good path to doing, that has the potential to make games that haven't been made before. And this is one of those games where you can have these massive battles that you see in movies that other games just can't do because they can't handle this many players. And on the design side, I think I would say more along the lines of doing something that is actually like MMO scale PvP, because we've seen a lot of MMOs recently be like sort of sandbox focused, where there's really not a whole lot going on in the game. A lot of like non-MMO games have done this too, where it's just sort of putting out PvP sandboxes that don't really have any content and are all just focused on players killing each other. And then you have the opposite side, where you have PvE MMOs that have all kind of dungeons and story and bosses and stuff that's all very heavily narrative and content driven, but then just don't have PvP, or only have PvP as sort of an instant sideshow, and certainly not on the scale of actually being an MMO. And so I think sort of doing more along those lines and having a game that is about PvP but actually has content and has things to do, not in the terms of like actually scripting things and having a bunch of narrative and dialogue and things like that, but sort of like you said, like being in a world that actually does have a context to it.
The combination of everyone's actions produces a larger story that you're a part of.
Yeah.
And that's the same kind of thing that you see with Eve. Eve is a great example. Just of there's certainly some issues with Eve, but but at the the 10,000 foot view of these major alliances formed and broken, and this little skirmish on the borderlands broke a treaty that led to this massive war that reshaped the game. Like, we want to have more of that. Like, that's a thing that not a lot of games have really successfully delivered on. And there's also kind of the small scale of like PvP sandbox. If it's just like Ben and I walk up to each other on an open field and whack each other and it's always the same, like that's boring. But how can the interactions with everything else in the environment and the other players make that that time that Ben and I had a duel in the middle of a battlefield, and this thing happened that shaped it, and like those water cooler moments where that's a one-time, that was a special event, not just time to kill versus time to kill. So to make that unique through its interactions with the world, like what you go all the way back, like I believe in, I don't want to tell you a story. I want to create a system where your story tells itself through your actions and everyone else's actions.
All right. Keep an eye out for our updates. And
actually,
Did
John
explain what was?
John, what was the answer? Testing. What is the test schedule? Okay. All right. Keep an eye for your email.
all right, and we will see you later.
Yes, we
I guess
will.
we have to say it, don't we?
Yeah, we have
All
to
right.
say it.
See you later.
See you later. See you later. I'll see you later tonight.
You guys. And on that note, keep an eye out for an update about news about streaming if you didn't hear what they were just saying, because they're saying it kind of quietly. And bye-bye.